Greetings, friends. My name is Jessa McLean, and I'm here to provide you with some blueprints of disruption. This weekly podcast is dedicated to amplifying the work of activists, examining power structures, and sharing the success stories from the grassroots. Through these discussions, we hope to provide folks with the tools and the inspiration they need to start to dismantle capitalism, decolonize our spaces, and bring about the political revolution we know we need. 2 years ago, students, faculty, and community members escalated their divestment campaigns and built encampments on their campuses right across the country. These encampments were built after months of pleading and pressuring university administrators to disclose their investments and divest from corporations complicit in the genocide. The camps that were able to establish themselves and remain for a good period of time became liberated zones of sorts. The mission was a free Palestine, but they were also creating models of cooperation and resistance that didn't sit well with these powerful institutions. And so we eventually saw injunctions and evictions. Some more violent than others, but none likely as swift and as violent as what happened at the University of Calgary. In March 2025, investigative journalist Jeremy Appel came on our show to share what he'd uncovered after looking into the communications between the province, the university, and the Calgary Police. In that episode, we got just an idea of what happened back on May 9th, 2024. We also shared some video of it. It was shocking, not just for the brutal suppression of a protest, but because it seemed like nothing became of it. The university stood by their decision. The provincial government essentially cheered it all on. We wondered if this kind of heavy-handed police response to peaceful protests on campus were going to just become the norm. And this is why some of those protesters, including our first guest in this 4-part series, are fighting back. 9 plaintiffs have launched a lawsuit against the University of Calgary, the Calgary Police, and a slate of named and unnamed officers for their actions on that day. Raheleh shares a powerful account of what happened to her that day and how it's impacted her deeply. She's also going to talk about why she's resisting in the way that she is and how she feels about going up against the province and police in court. Part 2 of the series will be an interview with another plaintiff, Wesam Cooley, who was the de facto police liaison for the group that night. He has an interesting story to tell as well. We then get to hear from their counsel, Chris Wiebe, who goes over the merits of the case and explains what a victory could mean for the plaintiffs, for others contemplating legal action, and for institutions who think they can reinterpret the charter when it suits them. The series will finish off with Dr. Roberta Lexier, an expert on social movements who has her own podcast mini-series on student power in Canada. She'll help explain why the university reacted the way that it did and what this all means for the larger movement to free Palestine. We'll roll these out over the next 2 weeks. We hope that you find it equally as enraging as it is instructional. You'll find a link to support the legal defense for these plaintiffs in the show notes, as well as more ways to engage on the topic. We also encourage you to share it with a friend and give it a rating on whatever podcast application you're using. Now let's get right into our interview with Raheleh. Good morning. Can you introduce yourself to our audience, please, before we start?
Good morning. My name is Raheleh Tarani, and I am an Iranian-Canadian board member of Iranian-Canadian Congress, and practicing psychologist in Calgary, and mother of 2 sons who were, of course, both UFC students when we attended the protest. So I don't know, do I need to say more about myself? I'm, of course, an activist, a leftist, and I don't know how elaborated this introduction should be. Yeah.
You know what? We get ranges of introductions. Sometimes we get fake names and no credentials, and that is fine. Maybe we'll unpack more about you as we go through the discussion. But really what brought us here is what your experience was May 9th, 2024. It's the topic of conversation for this episode. You're one of the plaintiffs that's in a lawsuit against the University of Calgary and the Calgary Police and some named and unnamed officers. And we've brought you here to talk about your experience. We'll be hearing from some of the other folks that were down there with you. I know how these things come together, right? You maybe go into this not knowing each other, and then you've been through the ringer for 2 years with one another. So that's probably shifted. But what brought you, other than perhaps a free Palestine, what brought you down to the campus at University of Calgary on that fateful day?
Yes. Yeah, of course, as you know, we all were disturbed with the news that, we were getting from Gaza and the killings and, very excruciating, images and all that we were exposed to and all. And so I learned that the university students have decided to have an encampment in the university, and my son informed me early morning that he was there, my elder son. And so I had to work. I went to school. I was working at that time as a psychologist for Calgary Board of Education. I went and worked with my students and all. And then I also work in a clinic. I went to the clinic after school, and up to 8 p.m. I was working in the clinic. And then I called my son and to see how things are, and he told me that we are still here and it's a very tense environment and all. And of course he was asking me, Mom, don't worry, you are tired and all. But anyways, I couldn't let him be alone there, and also there also that the sense of responsibility that I had. So ultimately I went there. I thought that is my responsibility to do something about what doesn't let me sleep every night. Every night I was feeling so guilty. It was hard for me. I constantly say that I'm sleeping in this bed, on this bed, and I am experiencing totally different environment and people in Gaza, children, and all those things. Every night, I was struggling with guilt, that I'm not doing anything. So I thought I will go there and just to at least do my duty in that regard. I also felt that my sons have the right to be in the campus and ask for what they think is right. Their charter rights. So I need to support that as well. So when I went to park my car, I was really shocked to see, oh my God, as if it's a big war over there. So I saw army of police officers, I was shocked with the number of police cars and, the whole group of guards over there, that what's going on, why it is they are just group of students, they're asking for what they think is right. And so why do we need to have all Calgary police gathered there? So anyways, I went and I realized that, of course, that most people who were there had come early morning and they were getting tired and all. Some discussions about that. Today is Thursday. Maybe we should have started on Friday so that, we could stay overnight. At least next day was Saturday. Some people have to go to work on Friday. So they were discussing and all. And so a group of people left. And then towards the end, the number was smaller. And I was just talking to other people who gathered there that it might be a better idea if we just go back and come tomorrow again, because it seems people have left because maybe this was not a right thing. Many people believe that it would have been better if we started on Saturday. Anyways, so when the number was reduced, then we decided that they should just put things back and to leave. And so the camps were removed, and we were like the people there, or the organizers were discussing how they can take the items to their cars, and how they can take the camps away. And I think there was some argument there whether they can bring a U-Haul, they can bring their cars, how they carry this. And while they were just discussing that, we were standing in a line, hand to hand, and just singing a song. And before that, just moments before that, I was just talking to these police officers there who were standing there, in front of us. I was telling them, how come you have come with gun? These students need to be brought flowers. They are the most responsible, the most, I think, sensible students of this university, who have studied history, who have studied social sciences, and, who really I think internalize the values that every teacher would love to imbibe in their students.
You were proud mom too.
I was proud mom, of course. I was very, very proud to see my son, his girlfriend there, and other university students. And I was asking them I also asked them another question I recall very well. I asked them, I really would like to know, I was genuinely interested to know, how did you feel when, like few days back, you heard UNICEF has announced 14,000 children have been killed in Gaza. How did you feel about it? I was thinking that we can have communication, just conversation. But very soon, suddenly, as if something changed, they were standing and we were standing and singing. Suddenly, it seems that they got an order. I am very sure that some order was what kind of started whole that chaos, that they suddenly came attacking us, move. And it was so shocking, unbelievable, that when we were standing the hand in hand, suddenly with their shields they pushed us back. And I cannot even really even now understand what happened, that from the group they pulled me and threw me on the ground, and the people sat on me, at least two, but many people say three people tried to restrain me. I didn't resist even being arrested. If they had stood there and said, you are under arrest, so I would have said, okay, whatever, I would not have liked it, but I would not have resisted that, but what was the necessity of them pulling me, throwing me on the ground, and restraining me the way they did? And I was wearing a very thick, actually, winter coat, and I'm sure that if that was not there, maybe I would have been fully crashed under them, So anyway, they took me to the police car. My glasses were thrown on somewhere and all, and they made me to sit in the police vehicle. And there I realized I can't breathe, something has happened to my chest and all, and I was not able to breathe. But then also I could see that they are throwing this tear gas and all lights and shootings and all. And that scene reminded me of very traumatic scene that I still deal with PTSD of that scene, that how my brother was killed in that type of crowd in Iran in 2009. So it was a very brutal kind of really killing and all. And so I was just thinking, oh my God, my brother who was killed in that protest was almost as old as my son who is in this crowd. And I suddenly was thinking, oh my, what is going to happen? Am I now going to lose my son? I didn't know what to do, and I am not able to breathe. It was it is really hard to articulate how I felt. But whatever, now I can't recall part of it. With trauma, we miss parts. How it ended. I remember that I was taken to the hospital, and later my son and his girlfriend came. But I still don't try to remember how I met them. It's hard to remember. My memory, I think, has suppressed them so that I don't remember. But anyways, I was of course, having those traumatic, experiences and dealing with severe pain, difficulty breathing, crying. But at the same time, I was feeling that something also, it seems, in this feels good. And what is that? And I realized that, my conscience is more clear. I don't feel the same guilt that every night was not letting me sleep. Like, that I don't do anything, children are being killed and all. And to be honest, these 2 years I have suffered, and I couldn't go back to university. Sometimes I had to go to university, but I will avoid. It was so painful. So that they gave us tickets and all. We again and again, police officers came to my place, I think 2-3 times, to make me go to court again and again and all, whatever. When these things were done, I was feeling very sad that, like, about what happened and all. I had totally lost my faith in this whole system over here, which I initially thought is much better than the condition that we had in Iran. But I was very, very disturbed. But I was very happy to know that some of our, some other people who got tickets and all have decided to kind of keep these people who impose this experience to us, to keep them accountable and to sue police and University of Calgary, those who there who ultimately are, I think, responsible for what happened. I felt that, oh my God, now these days I also, in addition to thinking constantly about Gaza and killings of children there, that in my country we had a war, and US bombs killed 168 elementary school students, just in, of course, triple bombing. They bombed them 3 times to make sure that all children have been killed. And I have been carrying that guilt, and I have been, angry about that that how could, I mean, it's hard to fathom, what type of mentality that is, that you can kill 168 children, knowing, now we know that they have done Israeli, if they did it 3 times, means that there has been intention to kill children. And so I felt so happy and so relieved, and I went to the campus that day really happily, that okay, now I will get chance to ask. They were asked that day, how did you feel about 14,000 children being killed in Gaza? Now I will ask these reporters, anyone who is there, how did they feel about 168 little children being killed just by US bombs there? And so I'm excited about that we are doing something, and the main motivation for me is to create more awareness about what's going on in the world and over here.
I can only imagine what I would have done getting a call from my son that riot cops, had shown up to what was supposed to be and was a peaceful protest, amongst all the other layers that kind of make your experience with the police here a little unique. However, part of the broader problem of how police and universities are responding to Palestinian solidarity. Do you find, you say happy, relieved, is there a sense of gaining back some level of power?
Yeah, of course. I think I definitely feel much more empowered now. And I think if this action helps all pro-Palestinian activists, all people who care for justice in the world, more empowered, that will be the greatest achievement. Exactly. I feel empowered that I was taken to court number of times, and it was proven I have not done anything wrong. And now, if I have not done anything wrong, why did I, made to go through that suffering? And I know that I was not alone. Other students, even though we are 9 of us who are suing police and all, but the reality is that everyone there, I think, who witnessed that scene was traumatized. It was so shocking. What I know is that encampment, was not allowed by university authorities, but protest was okay. And it was not even midnight. That in that I was thinking, this is my second home. This university is my second home. I have a son who is doing PhD here. I have a son who is doing masters here. I have, my car like has been always like driving to university, like to be in to just for different. My son did his graduation there in, like, in high school. So that is my second house, and they are telling me I cannot stand here and I, like, like just practice, exercise my democratic rights, or my children don't have right to practice what they are being taught. If they are being taught that, okay, this is the condition of world, we all have to contribute to like betterment of this world, like these students deserve really reward, not riot police to come and attacking them, like it. Definitely now I am feeling empowered with what we have started doing. Yes, for sure.
Excellent. There's another part of your experience that was unique. You spoke about the police delivering summonses or whatnot, because you had a ticket, and the statement of claim again is attached to the episode, folks, so you can see it for yourselves. But 2 people ended up with tickets that carried with it heavier consequences should you not oblige, and required court appearances, which are traumatic, time consuming, carry with it other weights. You also had a press conference just last week. I've lost track of time a bit, but not that long ago when the lawsuit was launched, people shared their experiences. Those experiences were shared with the media. But your story was left out a lot of that retelling. There's racism embedded in how the police responded to, we talked to the lawyer, and we'll talk to experts as to like why in general institutions respond this way to these kinds of protests. But then in those responses, so many variations and layers, intersections of oppression is the language some folks will use there. And do you want to talk about that and maybe how validating it is? Because when you spoke about it earlier before we were recording, that other people are going to argue this on your behalf, that other people witness this and are also helping you do something about it. It's not, you're not crazy. This disproportionate response has prejudice behind it, that we can name. So what was that like, seeing yourself, like once you realize what everyone's charged with, you get to compare? What was that like? And then maybe you could talk about the camaraderie, if that existed, for folks fighting, not leaving that out of the story.
Yeah. Thank you. Like that prejudice and that like being always discriminated, being a woman, being a brown woman, being from West Asia, like, I, in a way I am almost like, I think is used to, like, when they gave us tickets, as the tickets that gave me and another woman from the same area, like, were given different type of tickets, which we wonder why, like, how come we were there, all did the same thing, how come we get different types of tickets? And of course, as I say, like that was something that I kind of am in a way used to it. But it was irony when the other day we had a press conference on Monday, and so like 3 of us were supposed to talk, and we talked, and I shared my experiences like the way the other 2, and all press reporters who were there, like, interviewed the other 2 speakers. They broadcasted parts of their talk, and nobody covered my talk, nor they had any interview with me. And of course, like I knew deep down why, because I don't fit the narrative that they have, and my story was like, that, someone can be not really like as supporting Iranian government policies, how, and like even has paid a price there for freedom, but still is pro-Palestinian and is against what, like, we are doing. And that, so they saw this different from what they want to portray, and so they, like, kind of try to ignore me as if I don't exist and all. And I didn't say anything. But later people said, oh, your talk was powerful and all. It was an experience of a mother. I talked there, as a mother more than anything. And so why didn't they cover that and all? And other people were saying that this is the media that we have, corporate media, the media that is trying to to ultimately support the narrative that all this in general people in power here they are doing the right things, and it is that we are the people who create problem. They wanted it this way to kind of get support for their narratives. One thing which I like to share, if you don't mind, Jessa, is that I really recall that when I was kind of reprocessing all these things, I thought that now when I think about my brothers being killed in 2009, at that time I was furious, so angry. I had an interview with BBC and all saying how furious I am about what Iranian government has done. But today, sitting here, even though of course I don't support all the policies of Iranian government still, but what I remember is that what ultimately is happening there also to high extent because of the sanctions and because of difficulties people there are going through, that makes it so difficult for them. They are angry constantly because of class division increasing, and they dealing with poverty and all. So they are angry. They cannot just really the protest there was a little bit violent. There were people who were extremely angry with the government and all. And I know that it was not only Iranian government. If I want to really go to lower layers, again, it's because of what is being imposed to people over there. The reality is that they go to Middle East or West Asia with the excuse that, oh, these people are fundamentalists. But being a psychologist, I know that extremism is the result of trauma. The traumas of this sort that you create, of course, is going to create extremism. So even if I try to use whatever knowledge of psychology I have not to become extremist, but the reality is that usually if you suppress people so much and if you traumatize them, so it is very normal that they will be extremists. So who is then at fault? We are going and kind of putting all the blame on extremists, even though these traumas that they create ultimately causes that extremism. So I thought it's important to say that as well. And
I'm just going to interject there as well. I just want to say, and your case also demonstrates that when people take the peaceful road, when they, we're talking about a sit-in really overnight. That's all it is, a camp-in. Or there's been other demonstrations where they're just street protests, and, the Canadian police, American police respond with such violence, or these institutions reject and are so hostile. It doesn't encourage people to use those kind of mechanisms for change. They're forced to fight fire with fire to a degree because all the other avenues have been cut off from them with purpose, right?
Absolutely.
So
yes. And again, sorry, just is that it was not really staying overnight even. When we were arrested, it was not even midnight, and the camps were dismantled. So it was just we were standing there and singing song. And while our friends were just negotiating how to take back the items that they had there. So the camps were dismantled. So even it's not that, we were wanting to stay overnight. We decided that, okay, we will go and maybe some other time. But at that moment when we were arrested, we were just standing there singing while others were negotiating how to take the items that they had there. And you are absolutely right. When we can't get what we want through this type of very civil, very, like, I think, a peaceful kind of protest, then of course, then that is the reason that people then sort to other means.
Yeah, we're radicalized through the struggle.
Radicalized, yes.
Which isn't always necessarily a bad thing. We don't want things to escalate to the point where, that you described that you experienced in 2009. But, our podcast does encourage just more disruptive methods because we cover so many of these stories where, it's the state is just becoming increasingly repressive. Thank you so much. I know it's not easy reliving this, and, you might have to do it again. Do you have any, if there was a downside, not that I want to end on, you know what, let's just not. But I hate it. Okay. But I am curious, so I'll ask you, and I might just strike it though, but are you nervous about having to go to court on this and go through this system that, that has been kind of hostile? This is civil court. But do you have trepidation there, or are you eager to do that?
In fact, I think this is a good question. The way I spoke on Monday with press, that, we are not doing this just to take any type of revenge or anything. This is not a personal matter. We are very clear that what we have done was, our very basic right, and we don't have enmity against any particular individual. And because, when I think about the police officers who restrained me, who harmed me, actually injured me while arresting me, they were boys in my son's age, So I say that I look at them like my son, that has got an order and maybe is doing what he's being told, But the reality is that there is a bigger, I think that has to be addressed here. And who passed that order? Who sent them that order? Of course. And it's just that as I say, this is not personal thing that I feel little insecurity when I go to court. I will go with the sense of pride. I feel proud to do what is my responsibility as a human being, as a mother, as an activist, as a psychologist. I think it is my responsibility, and I have to do it. I do it with sense of pride, and know, even though just talking about these things, remembering these things is traumatizing. Really, I am re-traumatized every time I have to talk about what happened to us. But that sense of pride and that sense of that I am standing for my right, for my son's right, for other students' rights, and for justice, actually gives me a very good feeling. And no, I am not nervous about it. And I'm very, in fact, really excited that we are doing this. And I hope our energy adds to the energy of other activists who are working against all this system of oppressing people and raising awareness.
That ended up a nice question to end on, didn't it? So I don't know what my hesitation was. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your experience, and for fighting the good fight. It's not easy being a plaintiff, but it's heartening to hear that you are eager and are finding a sense of reclaiming power there. And the consistency from everyone I've spoken to about this is the constant need to keep centering the larger fight. So it's nice to hear that. Thank you
so much. Thank you.
That is a wrap on another episode of Blueprints of Disruption. Thank you for joining us. Also, a very big thank you to the producer of our show, Santiago Halu Quintero. Blueprints of Disruption is an independent production operated cooperatively. You can follow us on Twitter at BP of Disruption. If you'd like to help us continue disrupting the status quo, please share our content, and if you have the means, consider becoming a patron. Not only does our support come from the progressive community, so does our content. So reach out to us and let us know what or who we should be amplifying. So until next time, keep disrupting.